Well, hello, everybody. My name is Richard Swannell from RAP, and welcome to Tackling the Food Waste Funding Gap, Financing Food Waste Prevention to Combat Climate Change. We have an outstanding number of speakers for you today, and this webinar is all about how we can finance the halving of food waste around the world in line with the SDG 12.3. We'll discuss why tackle food waste, the benefits it brings in cost savings and as climate mitigation strategy. We'll examine how to leverage existing finance mechanisms to deliver national food waste prevention strategies, and the speakers will talk about exactly how that could happen. So we have a superb lineup. We have Adriana Zacarias from UNEP. We have Cruz from P4G, the Platform for Green Growth and the Global Goals. We have Valk from Rabobank. We have Marc Dumas-Johansen from the Green Climate Fund, and we have Fong from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. And after each one has given their presentations, then there will be a Q&A session available for, which I will moderate, available for the whole cast. And just to let you know that the session is being recorded, and it will be put onto UNEP's and RAP's website after the event. And also, we'll try and get around to all of your questions. If you could put your questions into the Q&A, that would be fantastic. And I will use those during the Q&A session. And if we don't get to all of the questions, we'll make sure that we answer those questions subsequently and put that up on the website. So thank you very much indeed for that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Adriana. Adriana Zacarias Farah, Head of Global Opportunities for the Sustainable Development Programme at UNEP. Adriana is a graduate from Cambridge in the UK with a Masters of Environmental Development and a BSc on Political Sciences from ITAM in Mexico. Adriana is an international expert on sustainable development, resource efficiency, and sustainable consumption and production. She supports policies, strategies, and initiatives related to green economy, circular economy, innovation for SMEs, and sustainable lifestyles, among other themes. A very complex range of things, Adriana, that you're responsible for. And Go for SDGs accelerates regional solutions for inclusive green economies and circularity, and works specifically in 3 areas: policy coherence, SME innovation, and youth empowerment. Adriana, over to you to introduce the webinar.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thanks for this introduction. A pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen. So, I don't know, oh, sorry. This is the new. Very happy to be here in this very important meeting. A few weeks ago, we were all paying attention to the Food System Summit. And I think key messages is the importance of the food systems that we have, the challenges ahead, and I will say the unacceptable conditions that we have today in having still food loss and food waste at the level as we have. So I'm very happy now to be in this webinar and to talk why this issue of food waste is important, how can we accelerate action, and also how actors, governments, institutions that are interested in reducing food waste can access funding. And I'm very pleased to be with a panelist, a special panelist today that will be talking about how to get this access to funding. I want to start just to set the scene a little and say why the issue of food system is important. What is the impact of our systems of food today? And it's not a secret, we all know and have heard about the importance of the food systems. We all know the impact it has, consuming almost 70% of the fresh water, the land use, almost 50%. Studies have shown also that agriculture is responsible by 70–80% of the biodiversity loss, and I would say most of this is due to the food production. And the last studies also are showing that if we really want to get in a scenario of 2 degrees Celsius, we need to reduce the greenhouse emissions of agriculture by 70%. So the challenge is very big here. And also, we also need to see how can we also increase efficiency of food to close the land gap that we have. Now, after all the impact that we know about the food, what is really a pity is that we know that 30% of the food is lost or wasted globally. So I don't need to repeat the impact that it is generating on the biodiversity and climate. This loss means also $1 trillion per year. But I will say again, this is unacceptable in a world that we know is suffering from hunger, that there are many people in the world that have nothing to eat. And at the same time, we also have people suffering from obesity. So this also shows the inequality that we are facing today and the challenge that we have. Related to climate change, we know that the temperature over land has increased by already an average temperature 1.5. And it is not surprising then that this is leading to having an increasing desertification and degradation of our soils. So all this to say that it's creating more and more pressure on the land, on agriculture, on the food production. And again, we cannot afford to continue wasting food the way we are doing it. Now, so just here to say the huge impacts it has on climate, on biodiversity, on pollution, not to talk about the use of pesticides, agriculture, chemicals in agriculture. So it is recognized, many of our institutions have already mentioned that food loss, food waste account of 8% of the greenhouse emissions could contribute to climate change by reducing 8% the CO2 emissions. But sadly, only 11 countries in the world have included food loss in their NDCs. None of them has included now the issue of food waste. And it's an area that actually is, now I will say, is the long-hanging fruit, because it's where countries can take more action, or institutions, to reduce the food waste, and then in this way try to enhance climate ambition. And this, I'm very happy to announce that UNEP and WWF last year, we launched this report on enhancing NDCs for food systems. And there you can have a lot of recommendations on how countries can include the food waste in their NDCs, and with that, try to, as I say, increase the ambition of climate. Not a secret for all of us to know that food loss and food waste can help us a lot to deliver many of the SDGs. We are in a decade of action. We all know that we are not on track to meet the SDGs. And therefore, I want to say here, the food waste plays more relevance. More relevance also because we saw last year the importance of COVID, the rupture, the disruption that we have in our supply chains. The poverty has increased, and without hunger, and a lot of people more suffering from lack of access for food. So again, reducing food waste could help us in meeting, of course, SDG 1 and 2 on reducing hunger and poverty. Is very relevant for SDG 12, of course, on halving the food waste, but also, as we already have mentioned, for climate, for biodiversity, for land use, etc. So it's not only talking about one little aspect or one indicator of the SDGs, it has an impact in most of the SDGs, and we have to see that in an holistic way. In these efforts—
Adriana,
yes?
If you just hear me, at the moment, unfortunately, I just noticed that we're in presentation view, so we're seeing both the slides. I just wonder if we could just change that so that you could see full screen, if that's possible. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, I'm very sorry. You see?
Yeah, we see in presentation view, so we see the current slide and the next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. You should have told me that before.
I should have done, Adriana. That's my fault.
Sorry, it's just.
Hi, Adriana. If you click display settings.
Yeah. That's the problem with, we have two screens. Sorry, that was boring then. Can you see now the full screen?
That's absolutely perfect. Thank you, Adriana.
Sorry about that.
Saying it earlier. Don't worry.
Okay, so in responding to the SDGs, what is really important is, as you know, the UN system is working together. We are very pleased working hand in hand also with FAO. They are the custodians of the indicator on food loss, 12.31, and UNEP, we are working on the indicator of food waste. And in that, I want to say we are very happy. In early this year, we launched now the Food Waste Index. This report has the whole methodology and will support countries in measuring their food waste. And also what is very important, we have now identified how are we doing globally, as you know, in each country, how are we doing with the food waste? And I have to say the news is not good. As you can see in the slide, we are wasting tons of millions of food every single day here. And by 2019, we were throwing in the bin 931 million tons of food. So yeah, so how can we do this report now with this methodology that has been developed in close cooperation with GRAP? We are providing now the countries with the tool to measure that and also help them how can we reduce it. Having said that, it's very important, one key message that came also from this report. Food waste is not an issue only for developed countries or for high-income households. As you can see in the graph, this represents an issue also for low middle income countries, where actually surprising food loss is actually higher. So here the key message is this is a common responsibility, a common challenge for the North and for the South, and we need to speed up action to reduce that. And here comes a good news in a way of speeding this up. With Go for SDGs, together with UNEP, GRAP, we are very pleased. We are now setting up regional working groups. In 4 regions, we will be working in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and West Asia to help countries in reducing food waste. We will be working with 25 countries and 68 national partners in developing and putting in practice this methodology, measuring that in food waste. But not only that, what we want is to facilitate the peer-to-peer learning and knowledge sharing and support the countries to develop their strategies to reduce food, and also include this also in their climate strategies. And of course, very important comes then the funding. And that's why I'm very happy that we are having today this seminar, so that we also can give countries or institutions the tools to finance then the future strategies that we will be developing. I just want to show a little the countries that we are working in the different regions, and to highlight, we did at the beginning of the year, we did an expression of interest. We were very happy to receive over 75 expressions of interest, and based on that demand is how we have developed these groups. Another good news, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, we were celebrating the Food System Summit, and as a symbol and signal really on the need and the commitment of many of us in speeding action, we are here happy to announce the new global coalition, and food is never waste. This coalition brings together UNEP, FAO, the World Resource Institute, the World Bank, Rabobank, WWF, and more. We are also happy to know that 12 countries have joined the coalition, as well as the C40. And this will not be only like advocacy. The idea is that countries are setting the targets. They are committing to meeting the SDG 12.3, reporting the progress, and then again, speeding up the development of strategies and initiatives to meet that. So you are all invited to also join this coalition. I want to stop here, and just the last message is to say, sadly, what we see is that food waste is receiving less attention, therefore less funding. But we are very pleased then, as I mentioned, to see that there are more institutions now that are putting financial mechanisms that could support the countries in tackling this important issue. Thank you very much, Richard, over to you. And let me now.
Thank you very much indeed, Adriana. That's very kind of you. And thank you for setting the scene for the day. That's absolutely great. It's now, so I'm now going to follow up on what Adriana has just said, and actually make the case for action on food waste. And just Good. Just wanted to build exactly on what you just said there, Adriana. I think you've very eloquently laid out the overall case for action on food loss and waste, and on food waste specifically. And what I wanted to do in this session is just to dive down into a bit more detail as to exactly why we should tackle food waste and what the benefits are. And if I'm looking at it from an economic, a social, and an environmental perspective. And just so that RAP is also delighted to be part of that coalition, Food is Never Waste coalition. So just to reiterate what you've heard from Adriana already, for every 2 tons of food we eat, another ton is wasted in the entire supply chain. That gives you an idea of the sheer scale. Around a third of total amount of food production is wasted going right across the supply chain. And just to give you an idea of the scale, an area the size of China is needed to grow the food that we throw away every single day, every single year around the world. So that gives you such a scale, you know, all of that land being used to grow food that is discarded around the world. And that has huge financial implications, over $1 trillion, which is more than 10 times the turnover of the world's biggest food manufacturer, Nestle. And environmentally, it's up between 8 and 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which, if food waste was a country, would be the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet, behind China and the USA. And that's against a background of 1 in 9 going hungry. As Adriana said, over the latest numbers are 800 million going to bed every night hungry. And actually, when Project Drawdown has looked at the most efficacious strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in line with the Paris Convention, reducing food waste comes out at top. Depending exactly how you calculate, the potential is between 91 and 102 gigatons of CO2 reduced. So tackling food waste can have a massive impact on global greenhouse gas emissions. But is there a return on investment? So a piece of work that RAP and WRI did specifically around the world, looking at 1,200 business sites in 700 companies and in 17 countries around the world, looked at what are the costs of tackling food waste and what are the benefits financially from tackling that. And it came out with extraordinary that the mean return on investment for every $1 invested, there was around $7 of financial benefit. When you looked at the median, it was as high as 14, going right across the range. And also 90% of the projects were getting the money back within 2 years of the work being conducted. So that's an excellent return on investment. And just to give you a bit more detail, this gives you the range. You can see the majority were in the 1 to 5 category, followed by the 5 to 10. But there were some business case return on investments which were absolutely excellent. And a lot of those were because those were delivered by behavior change strategies, for example, in restaurants, hospitality and food service, which would have very low investments to drive the change. But what is critical is that actually tackling food waste gives you an excellent return on investment, which sort of then begs the question, why are more companies and more organizations tackling food waste? And I think the answer is on this slide, which is that many companies see the visible cost of food waste being the disposal costs of the food from their operations, from their restaurants, from the back of retail and redistribution and distribution depots around the world. Whereas that's just the cost of picking it up and putting it into some disposal, for example, incineration or composting, hopefully, or indeed landfill. Whereas the actual cost, of course, is all the money and the effort that's gone into producing the food in the first place, growing it, transporting it, chilling it, putting it into packaging, putting it on the shelves. And that's lost materials, that's lost labor, that's lost energy costs, that's lost water. So on average, that cost can be around 10 times or more the cost of disposal, depending where you are in the world. So I think that's the reason why it's not, and therefore there's a real opportunity to tackle food waste and to get an excellent return on investment. And when we're thinking about food waste, just to give you an example of just the point that was already made, that food waste in the home is a massive problem. In Europe, it's around half of the total amount of food waste produced post-farm gate. Food service, another 12, and retail, another 5%. Those three areas constituting the food waste component of Europe. And in the UK, the number is as high as 70% of the food post-farm gate is in the home. So tackling household food waste is absolutely crucial if we are going to halve food loss and waste by 2030. It's got to be a key area, and it's one of the areas where there's relatively little activity outside a few countries around the world. And just to echo, and I've deliberately echoed Adriana's point on this slide, which is that the work that the food waste reported in the Food Waste Index report shows clearly that food waste is a global problem. Broadly, the same per capita food waste is found in low middle income countries, upper middle income countries, and indeed high income countries. And that means that over the world, we are wasting more than the average human's body weight every single year in wastage in our homes alone. So this is a key area to focus on going forward. Now, how can we tackle this? Well, one way to tackle household food waste is through behavior change campaigns. And there are some good examples around the world. For example, Love Food, Hate Waste, which actually does deliver real change by helping citizens make simple changes in the home and also in their buying habits to help them buy what they need and eat what they buy. And just to give you an idea, the Netherlands has reduced edible food waste in the home by 27% using behavior change campaigns. In the UK, it is 31% of edible food waste. That's 1.4 million tons per year, every single year, that is now how it has been reduced. And to give you an idea of the ratio of the costs of the campaign to the savings the citizens can make can be in the range of 80 to 100 for every dollar invested in those campaigns. So they can give an excellent return for citizens in terms of the amount of money spent on the campaigns and the amount of savings that are made by citizens. So to give you an idea, that we're talking about something like 5 to 5.5 billion euros saving as a result of the food waste reductions that's happening in the UK homes. And this is also delivers reduced greenhouse gas emissions and can be a cost-effective way of delivering greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So the UK emissions is equivalent to taking 2 million cars off the road. So just coming to my conclusions, the case for investing in food waste is compelling because it saves money, it reduces carbon emissions, and it improves food availability, as Adriana has said. And the return on investment is significant and the benefits are substantial. And I think the key thing from today is this is ripe for rapid scale up in investment. Thank you very much indeed for your attention. And now it's my pleasure, to introduce the next speaker, who is Ian de Cruz, the Global Director of P4G. And Ian P4G is the Partnering for Green Growth and Global Goals by 2030. It's a new initiative to support innovative public-private partnerships that advance the new economy. He leads efforts to bring together global government, business, and civil society organizations to grow game-changing partnerships to supply humanity's greatest needs: food, water, shelter, energy, and sustainable use of resources. Ian directs P4G's Global Hub from the World Resources Institute headquarters in Washington, and thank you for joining us at such an unusually early hour, Ian. I really appreciate you getting up early to join us today, and really looking forward to hearing what you say. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, RAP and Adriana and UNEP for the opportunity for P4G to be a co-host on this important topic of how we turn food loss and waste into a market-based solution that in time can become an investable asset. So a little bit about P4G. P4G itself is a partnership of 12 partner countries and 5 partner organizations, including an ecosystem of over 140 business partners and 100 civil society partners, including RAP and UNEP here. Our partnership provides solutions in developing countries in 5 areas, food and agriculture being one, water, energy, cities, and the circular economy being others as well. Our partnerships are really focused on these market-based solutions led by developing countries and aligned with the country's development and climate priorities to catalyze action by the private sector and investors, like you'll hear from Ben in Rabobank. Since 2018, we've developed a pipeline systematically of more than 50 partnerships, looking to leverage investment of over 290 million and scale impact of about 110,000 tons of annual emissions. P4G is the type of emerging initiative for investing in countries to notice on how we can develop a pipeline of partnerships in the very early stages to unlock their investment potential. In this case, we are looking to work with our partners like UNEP and RAP to turn food waste into a market-based solution that can ultimately become an investable asset, and are actively doing this in Indonesia, Mexico, and South Africa, which, as Adriana and Richard have both mentioned, are part of the regional working groups that UNEP is looking at. So there's a question, you know, if this is a compelling case, why is it so hard to find these market-based solutions? And I'll just pan up from a macro perspective and then talk specifically about this area. So what we see globally is this huge gap, a 2.5 trillion financing gap to actually implement the Sustainable Development Goals, including this SDG 12.3. And our thesis in P4G is we really need to bring developing countries at the heart of this transformations and find solutions on their terms. But this graph, which is a little bit technical, but really highlights that in that first quadrant of those 3 silos, that early stage investment, that's where there's significant underinvestment in actually turning development concepts into solutions. And this is the space that P4G plays to try and provide that catalytic funding and guidance for early stage solutions so they can become financially sustainable. And how we try and establish an ecosystem of stakeholders who are united in accelerating these partnerships, such as UNEP, RAP, and Rabobank. In the food system, you know, we need to find solutions that actually can get to the net zero place for food, that actively bring the private sector into these solutions quickly to turn this food loss and waste into an asset. And the final point of this slide is about the whole value chain. We have to look at it not only in isolation, but need to look at the whole value chain from farm to fork to identify where we can improve systems, reduce waste, and drive back income for smallholder farmers ultimately. That is the approach P4G takes as we look to develop our food and agriculture pipeline. In this next slide, you see a little bit of our food and agricultural value chain that is really clustering around certain themes. These are partnerships that we look to bridge gaps and drive efficiency and build resilience across the entire whole value chain from farm to fork. And there are 3 specific solutions I'd like to highlight. The first one, Flawless, is a P4G partnership with RAP and UNEP. And at the core of it, it's about turning food loss and waste the way that Adriana explained, to really see that this is a huge opportunity for savings that is being unlocked by governments working together, by setting targets, by corporates voluntarily committing to these targets and actually seeing those operational savings and driving that forward, from independent institutions like RAP, like WRI, World Resources Institute, to actually start to measure this systematically across that platform. And then for investors to crowd in, like the Rabobanks and others in the world, to actually see that this is an investable asset that we can actually catalyze and work systematically together. That is what RAP has called the Target, Measure, Act, and Invest approach, to really bring all these actors from governments to the private sector together. Another example of a partnership that in P4G that is really bringing and catalyzing the agribusiness is Plus Plus. Plus Plus is a crowdfunding platform that allows individual investors in places like UK, Netherlands to contribute to the agricultural development, better wages, and improved smallholder livelihoods by investing in small, medium enterprises directly in countries. This partnership has secured over €500,000 to date, euros in affordable private debt capital for 14 agri-food small, medium enterprises in Colombia, Nicaragua, Ghana, Kenya, and Indonesia. Because of this partnership, 5,000 farmers worldwide receive a better income, and 1,500 farmers saw their food production increase despite the challenges we all see in COVID times. It's a great example of direct income and enterprise capital very quickly from retail investors in UK, in the Netherlands, to small, medium enterprises in countries around the world. The final partnership, Sustainable Food Partnership, while not explicitly about tackling food waste, is a valuable model of turning food insecurity and the need to import foods to one that can be locally produced and potentially become an export opportunity. It focuses on core national priorities in Ethiopia around food security, child nutrition, increasing the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, to bring private sector investment into Ethiopia. It provides a clear solution, a nutritious food biscuit that is often imported otherwise, to have greater nutritional value, to be produced locally, and to really be an enhancement in nutrition, but turns what is usually a product that is imported to a source of livelihoods and may ultimately become a product that Ethiopia itself exports. So what we're looking to do both in P4G and with our partners is to look at this entire chain. I think the work done in Flawless and actually finding that value chain, starting to measure it, is an approach that we'd love to see go all the way back to smallholder farmers as we link these different parts of the farm to fork value chain together. So in this next slide, as we look about how to scale solutions in the food loss and waste, it's important to understand the fundamentals of what we've learned from P4G of what makes a partnership successful and apply it in this context. The first one is that we want to see a solid business model. And we're fortunate with the UNEP Food Index report, the work that RAP has pioneered is the business case for food loss and waste is here. There is an opportunity to be ambitious because this is a win-win solution, one that can be good for the environment, can be good for the community, and also drive a whole new market. But to do that, we need to find entrepreneurs. We need to find people who will actually drive these solutions on the ground to start unlocking these savings in food loss and waste. And we have in our ecosystem institutions like Lean Path as a business actually trying to be that intermediary to see that this is a market-based opportunity, that businesses can be created from that. But it does start from government leadership, and that's where UNEP with its regional working groups, working with people like RAP, we need to find our country partners to actually put food loss and waste at the heart of government agendas, to set these targets for food loss and waste so that it is not just a saving on track, but it's actually core to how the government looks at this issue at the highest level. We see it's also really important as a fourth element to blend this with financial approaches to really catalyze the private sector to want to invest in this area quickly. And you'll hear a little bit more from Ben about how Rabobank is doing that. The fifth one is that it has to really create a whole of market change. It must go beyond simple mapping of stakeholders to really the question of how do governments set targets together with corporates actually committing to action, but actually acting itself, and then ultimately bringing investors into it to say that this is a financial product, this is an investable asset. And as we look to scale within this partnership, we're doing this in, learning from the experiences in UK, learning from the experiences in Netherlands, but really with RAP, with UNEP, trying to bring that and contextualize that as relevant in Indonesia, Mexico, and South Africa to scale that as quickly as possible within the ecosystem that Adriana presented of that global coalition and regional working groups. So as we look in the final slide, what we really want to share with you is how do we work together on this. So in P4G, we're talking about a coalition of doers, not talkers, not conveners, but doers. And so for governments out there, listening, set those targets on food loss and waste so that we can align them with corporate commitments. You have already with people like RAP NGO communities willing to measure this, working with corporations to agree on these targets and how this can be implemented. But what is really important is the act is the most important. And I think that's where finding the entrepreneurs, but actually driving those food loss and waste savings. I'm saying this to Richard constantly when we talk about these partnerships. What are the kilos of savings? Not only just how many corporates are we committing, but how many kilograms and thousands of kilograms are we saving in the initiative to really see this as happening. And the more we can establish that evidentiary base, the more you will see financial institutions crowd in with people like Rabobank, but also we're seeing with the development financial institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank being more and more interested in how we can turn food loss and waste into an investable asset. Thanks, Richard. Over back to you.
And thank you very much, Ian, for that very insightful talk. And I really love that in there, that target, measure, act, invest. I mean, that is the way forward. And I love that emphasis in sort of hard line underneath act. We really need to get more action. And I think that is one of the key messages from this particular, from the webinar today, is how do we accelerate action? How do we use this best practice around the world? And how do we find the resources in order to maximize that acceleration? Thank you, Ian. That was very inspiring. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. But before I do, can I just remind all of us that if you have questions, please can you put the questions in the Q&A box, and then I'll get to those questions at the end of when we've given all the presentations and everybody's spoken. So please, by all means, if you have questions, pop them into the Q&A box. That would be hugely helpful. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, which is Ben Valk from Rabobank. And Ben is Global Head of Agri-Partnerships and Food for Rabobank. Rabobank's international mission is to be the global leading food and agri-bank based on our banking for food strategy. Rabobank provides access to finance, knowledge, and a network to establish ecologically, socially, and economically sustainable food systems. And based on his previous roles in domestic and international banking and development in the agriculture sector, Ben maintains high-level networks from which partnerships aiming at food system transformations are derived. And the area I've seen you in action, Ben, is when you've been working in the run-up to the UN Food Systems Summit, and excellent work and support that Rabobank has taken a real leadership role there. So it's a real pleasure to have you here today, and look forward to hearing your presentation. Over to you, Ben. Ben, I think you're on. I think you're on mute this time. You may just need to repeat those.
Is it like this?
That's it. I can hear you lovely now.
You can hear me well. Okay, wonderful.
So, thank you.
Thank you. I think the name of Rabobank has been mentioned so many times by Ian that I can skip the commercials for the bank. And you've heard my whole bio, so I can also skip the personal commercials. I was struck by the comment that on average household food waste is more than the average body weight of the person realizing that waste. I'm afraid that's not the case in my personal case, both because I try to reduce food waste in my own home, but it's maybe bad news for my body weight. Anyway, that's all my introductions. I'm very happy to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. I have basically two things. The first is that I've been asked to speak about the finance solutions that Rabobank provides. So I'll give you a very brief view of the Rabobank 12.3 loan, one of our impact loans. And then I'd like to spend a few minutes thinking with you about this question: how do we tackle this funding gap, and what exactly is that gap? And in summary, the good news for governments and public sector bodies that basically have to provide, I guess, the funding that private sector investors and financiers will not do is that, in my view, it can kind of focus on a few very specific needs of funding. And there is a link to kind of public infrastructure, road infrastructure, power infrastructure, etc. And those investments, public sector investments, are possibly big. but do not serve the purpose of just food loss reduction and food waste reduction alone, of course. Other than that, in my view, the public sector needs for funding are there, but are relatively kind of overseeable and are not huge or immense. Although I do support the idea of the business case of investment in food loss and food waste reduction, in one hand, I'm also not so happy with it. And I hear numbers of 1 to 8, 1 to 16, 1 to 24, 1 to 80 to 100. And that would all make for wonderful investment cases, of course. Be it that the benefits of those investments boil down with others than who are supposed to make the investment. Very often people do not even specify who they expect the investment to make, the one. But if it's governments and your budget are already under enormous stress and the IMF are telling you you cannot further increase your international debt ceiling, you've reached your debt ceiling, then even investing that one, if you know that it's for the benefit of 24 or 80 to 100, you know, SMEs or citizens, may not be feasible. So we still have a point there. Now, I do not have slides, but I'd like to share with you just something about the Rabobank 12.3 loans. Let me try, and this is what you get if you just open your browser and type rabobank.com. So all of you can do that. And then if you look for search, and you search for 12.3, which I'm sure you all would also know, of course, in this context. You get an overview of things that Rabobank is doing in terms of food loss and food waste reduction. So Champions 12.3, we would our CEO is one of the champions. A story on Denmark, a story on food loss challenge in Asia, where we challenge SMEs to come up with innovative ideas for food loss and food waste reduction. But here, the second one is about Ecoplaza being the first customer for the new Rabobank loan to cut food waste. The new SDG 12.3 loan, and if you click on read more, you get the whole storyline. Now, Ecoplaza is an organic food supermarket chain in Holland. Thinking about food loss and food waste, I think they should be able to reduce lower than normal food waste for supermarkets, because they have customers, right, that are concerned anyway about sustainability. That's why they are an organic food supermarket. So their customers would probably mind less, let's say, some oddly shaped foods and things, and would still be willing to buy those, you know, curved cucumbers or straight bananas or whatever. Should be no problem for the general Ecoplaza customer. On the other hand, they have an issue, of course, because they want to abstain from using chemicals for crop protection. So that could be a reason for more than average waste. Anyway, they basically applied for the Rabobank 12.3 loan. That's a loan that basically gives you a lower interest rate if you meet certain criteria, and vice versa, charges you a higher interest rate if you do not meet the targets. And the targets in the 12.3 loan are, of course, food loss and food waste reduction related. So you use the WRI and others developed food loss measurement framework, and you link KPIs, you set certain targets for the company. If they realize them, they will pay less for their loan. How is that covered? Partly we do that on the cost of our own balance sheet, partly multilateral development banks also partner with us to cover that differential in interest rate. Now, of course, all of this stands with good measurement, right? Of course, agreeing targets, but first of all, also good measurement. And the nice thing about food loss and food waste is that we do have those measurement frameworks. In many other topics in nutrition, etc., that is far more of a problem. currently the loan has only been marketed in the Netherlands and amongst wholesale companies, but we have now opened it up internationally, globally, for wholesale companies, and we are expanding and developing it also towards SMEs and farmers. So that's an example in the space of green financing, if you will, that not only Rabobank but also many others can do. Now, let me leave it there. You can look at the website, and you're also happy, of course, always to send me an email and ask more detail. What I'd now like to come to is the question of tackling the funding gap. It was already referenced that I was part of the leadership team of the Food is Never Waste Coalition, one of the coalitions that emerged from the UN Food System Summit. And of course, in my capacity as a banker, I've basically focused a lot on this finance question. With a bias, I'm just open to say, with a bias to apply for private sector financing wherever possible. And I think in the whole space of food loss, but also in the space of food waste, as far as companies are involved, so restaurants, catering, hospitality, supermarket, food retail chains. Basically, reducing food loss and food waste, of course, increases the efficiency of the operations of those companies. And therefore, potentially, there are possible side effects, but potentially increases their profitability and therefore their margin with which they could also finance the investment in those food loss and food waste reduction measures. So in principle, we should always look for companies to finance their own operations and their own efficiency improvements, and food loss and food waste reduction is one of them. Of course, we can look at external effects. If we look at GHG emissions and we have taxation of GHG, or we have carbon credits in cases where there's no taxation, but people still want to pay for emissions reduction or carbon sequestration, then we can also derive an additional external cash flow from which to finance these investments. In principle, I would say that 80% of the investments by companies can be financed this way. Now, then, question, of course, what is needed from public sector? And then I'll hand over back to you, Richard. I see a few limited number of specific areas where we need public sector to assist. That is in de-risking the transition. When you move from an existing model to a new model, the new model should be economically viable in itself. The old model hopefully is as well. The problem is not the new or the old model, the problem is in the transition. And the first few years of introducing new business models, new production models, new ways of logistics are always the most risky. And that's why we need a temporary de-risking facility. That's one. Then, of course, we have these kind of coalitions like Food is Never Waste and others, but also expert groups to really develop those new business models, develop the funding and finance solutions, do the technical assistance, etc. That's just out-of-pocket expenses on experts, on people on the ground, and we need to find some funding. In some cases, that can be paid by those companies. In some cases, cannot, and we'll need governments to do that. My problem is in consumers, the consumer home food waste. That is where we really need public sector funding, I guess, to pay for all the public awareness campaigns. And I understand, you know, if I look at the numbers of reducing food waste in homes in Netherlands and UK that were mentioned, that was basically paid for by public sector entities, by governments. The last is infrastructure development. I've mentioned that, I won't go into it right now. Conclusion, yes, we need some public sector funding, but only for a few very specific parts of the whole solution. And In that sense, I totally agree. It is a very good investment for governments, especially if you look at the multitude of SDGs that are affected. And the good thing is we have tons of hotspots where we can reduce food loss and food waste. So if we don't find a viable business case in one place, please let's move to the next and do 70–80% of all that's out there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much indeed. And really appreciate those interesting comments. I particularly was fascinated by that temporary de-risking phase, which is that critical intermediary between where we are now and where we need to be. And I think that's absolutely right, because I think once people are really clear that the investments give you an excellent return, the measurements in infrastructure all works really well, everybody's clear on the outcomes, then I think things will move very rapidly. I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing the screen for us, Ben, and then move on to
I will.
Thank you. But thank you very much indeed for that. And I'm sure you're going to attract a lot of questions based on what you've just said. So again, I remind you to just keep putting the questions in the Q&A box. That's great. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, who is Marc Dumas-Johansen from the Green Climate Fund. Marc is an agriculture and food security specialist with the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation at the Green Climate Fund, based in Incheon, Republic of Korea. Marc leads and coordinates the review of agriculture, food security, and related natural resources projects, from project ideas to full funding proposals presented to the GCF board for approval. And prior to the GCF, Marc worked for the FAO in Rome and on GEF projects as well. And Marc, thank you for joining us today. And again, thank you, because for you, it's particularly late in Korea. So I really appreciate you joining us. And over to you.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you so much, dear delegates, dear colleagues. It's really excellent to be with you today and have the opportunity to learn from all these great initiatives, and also to share some of the thoughts that we at the GCF are trying to put together at this moment. So let me quickly share my presentation here. I hope you can all see. Hope you can all see this in full mode. Richard, does it look okay?
It's not in full mode just yet, Marc. It's okay. You need to go into presentation mode. And it's not on the first slide.
Sorry. Yes, hopefully that is better.
Perfect.
Sorry. Yeah,
perfect. Thank you.
So I have the opportunity today, colleagues, to share a few slides with you on the newly launched agriculture and food security sector guide of the GCF. We are currently doing these sectoral guides for each of our thematic areas. We work across both mitigation and adaptation. So working across different thematics, we are preparing these very strategic documents to help countries and our partners to develop projects that seek to go in these directions. And so today I'll be sharing some thoughts on the key topics of this new guidance, in particular looking at food systems, where we have a specific focus on food loss and waste. That is what I will share today. But firstly, just a very few words on who we are. So the GCF is one of the key financial mechanisms to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So we help and support countries to finance their climate targets, also addressed and presented in their indices. And we work through a partnership with different accredited entities, public and private sector, and of course through a very strong country partnership base. And we work across different instruments, grants, loans, guarantees, and equity, trying to find the best suitable mix of these instruments to meet the targets. And we work based on many different mechanisms, from readiness funding, which is more capacity building, to national adaptation plans, small-scale projects up to more than $250 million projects. So working across all that span. We work, as I mentioned, through accredited entities and countries. So based on the documents that they develop, they develop these projects and ideas together jointly, the countries and the accredited entities, and then submit these ideas to the Secretariat for better review. And then finally, of course, once it passes the internal mechanisms, for consideration to the board. So we work quite a lot with direct access entities in many different countries worldwide, both national and regional, private sector entities as well, and also international with most of the UN agencies. So focusing on the sectoral guide. So recently this guidance came out, and I'll be sharing the link with you in a minute, really highlighting what is the direction, the paradigm shift that we would like to see in the agricultural sector. And zooming in here on the left, you have the three main pathways that we believe is the direction we would like to support more projects in going forward, which is mainly looking at agroecology, early warning systems, climate information services, and then finally food systems, basically capturing it all. And within the food systems, really looking in particular at food loss and waste. And we want to try and look at this across our four drivers of paradigm shift, thinking how can we stimulate this paradigm shift through the projects by looking at these three drivers, mainly looking at what is the current transformational planning and programming we can achieve. How can we catalyze climate innovation in the projects? How can we mobilize finance at scale? How can we leverage private sector finance, for example? And how can we build coalitions or build on coalitions and knowledge management to achieve better results? So the last pathway we have, which is focusing on food systems, is really interesting, and we're very happy to share it with you today and have this opportunity to discuss this further, as this is a fairly new topic for us. So we really want to see in the food system pathway here, how can we look at the way we produce food and change that and store it and process it and sell it and consume it? How can that become more sustainable? And how can we support that transformation? Basically looking at reshaping the supply chains, looking at the processing itself at the very local level to larger levels and across the whole product development of these products. And of course, how can we help reduce food loss and waste? How can we measure that in our projects, and how can we stimulate the different interventions that can succeed that? And finally, how can we help shift the consumers to have a more sustainable diet? How can we promote those alternative diets and products that can take place and are relevant and are there? And of course, this has to be as sustainable as possible, looking at deforestation-free products. We have to have also a way to look at the green energy used for this processing and further storing these opportunities. So with all this, basically, where would we like to go from here? With this guidance out now, we would like to go for the next step, which is really to help set up pipeline development and more partnerships with partners such as you today and many other colleagues out there. How the DCF can help support some of these measures going forward. And for example, how can we look at the current option of the NDC reporting and the food loss and waste reported nationally at the farm level and across the rural landscapes to the national level? How can we capture that and translate that into to the NDC reporting? Currently, very few NDCs report on food loss and waste, and we do see this as an interesting opportunity to capture this and as well promote this in a project setting. And of course, as many colleagues mentioned before me, on the UN Food System Summit, there are excellent opportunities to build on that, which we are trying hard to do, and are really interested to hear from all of you how to better do that. But in particular, looking at the many game-changing solutions that were submitted across the different action tracks, how can we turn some of them into concrete project ideas and concept notes that could eventually be submitted to us for funding? And looking specifically at three areas here, we are interested to really see how can we look at some of these hotspot areas and the key commodities that could be tackled to start with. Looking at the farm gate and the rural landscapes and the loss happening there, pre-harvest to harvest and post-harvest. Then looking across the food loss, across the value chain. And finally, at the consumer level. So these are just some of the thoughts that we would be very interested to discuss. But of course, we're really keen to work with as many partners as possible and to hear as many interesting ideas and see how we can work together and how we can build some very innovative projects together. So with that, dear colleagues, thank you very much. Please feel free to reach out to me. You have the link here to the below, and thank you so much, and back to you, Richard.
And thank you very much indeed, Mark. And that was really clear. And it's also great to see that Green Climate Fund is now prioritising work on food loss and waste reduction. That's just marvellous development. I'm sure there'll be some more questions along that, but that's great to see also that linkage with the NDCs that you're encouraging. So thank you very much for doing that. And now it's our final speaker of the day, Patty Fong from the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. Patty is a Programme Director for Climate, Health and Wellbeing at the Global Alliance, a strategic alliance of philanthropic foundations working together with others to transform the global food system for future generations. She brings 2 decades of experience with strategic philanthropy in climate and sustainability, and she was formerly the Programme Director and founding COO at the European Climate Foundation, the first philanthropic collaboration on climate in Europe. Welcome, Patty. Really good to have you join us. Looking forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to share my slide. And I know I'm the last, and I hope people won't be bored by yet another set of slides, but I'll try to be succinct. Can you see presentation mode? Which do you see?
We just see the first slide and then the next slide coming up. So it's a little bit like Adriana had a,
okay.
It's not in full screen mode at the moment, Patty.
Yes. Hold on. How about this?
That's brilliant. Well, that's perfect.
Thank you. All right. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak on this webinar. Let me first by just giving a bit more introduction about the Global Alliance. So, as you said, we're a strategic alliance. We currently have 31 members, and all of them bring long-standing as well as newfound commitments to food systems change, addressing issues related to the global food and agriculture at different scales, on diverse issues, and from a multitude of perspectives. So, for example, our member foundations promote agricultural science research. They partner with rural women's organizations to create change that benefits families, communities, and regions. They improve access to local, sustainable, and nutritious food using collaborative research and knowledge sharing. They address the root causes of climate change, increase public awareness of issues created by our current industrial food system, protect critical ecosystems, back the stewards of cultural and biological diversity, and expand access to affordable quality healthcare for the underserved. And this is just really just a small sample. As you see, we've grown quite a bit over the last couple of years, so there's even more diversity in terms of what our members support. Our vision is healthy, equitable, renewable, resilient, and culturally diverse food and agricultural systems shaped by people, their communities, and their institutions. Earlier this year, we launched 7 interconnected calls to actions, which highlight critical pathways to food systems transformation, which have been elevated time and again by our members, partners, allies, and those we have collaborated with over the last 8 years. You can see on the screen that the 7, which is 1, to ensure inclusive participatory approaches to governance as a way to address the structural inequities in food systems. 2, to increase research for the public good that emphasizes indivisible ecological health, social and economic goals. 3, to account for the environmental, social and health impacts of food system policies and practices in order to inform better decision-making. 4, to direct public sector finance and fiscal policy toward ecologically beneficial forms of farming, healthy food, and resilient livelihoods and communities. 5, to unlock investment opportunities in sustainable food systems and align private, philanthropic, and multilateral funders with national food systems actors. 6, to create enabling environments where agroecology and regenerative approaches can flourish. And finally, to promote nutritious, sustainable whole food diets adapted to local ecosystems and social cultural contexts. By addressing all 7 of these calls to actions and collaborating with others, we can also address many of the same root causes of food loss and waste. You notice in number 5, where we identify the opportunity to unlock private financial flows, including philanthropic investment. This can happen, especially considering the foundations that I mainly engage with, when it's aligned with other action areas. So it's not just picking and choosing across, just one of these 7. They actually have to come as a set. So for example, we need leadership on good governance, on inclusive participatory governance approaches. We need leadership on research, on accounting for the co-benefits, these externalities, on fiscal policy, and on public finance. And finally, just briefly on the way we work. So, we really focus on the global level, and we advance these calls to actions by, forging new insights, kind of creating evidence-based kind of resynthesis of research to support the need for global systems change, by convening food systems actors and facilitating meaningful dialogue and strengthening the interconnections to really cut across siloed approaches and siloed discussions. And finally, we stimulate local and global actions and interaction for transformational change, both within our member organizations and the broader world of philanthropy, as well as with partners and allies at the global level. So for example, at the global level, we've been closely engaged with the recently held UN Food Systems Summit that has been mentioned a couple of times. We also follow the Committee on World Food Security, and now we're very focused on connecting the dots between food systems and climate change at COP26. As has been mentioned previously, we're facing a triple planetary crisis on climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and as well as a human health crisis, of which COVID is just, laying bare just the kind of the impacts that our food systems are having on the health and well-being of the global population. One of the connecting threads through all these crises is the dysfunctional food systems that's making us ill, as well as driving climate change. And therefore, it's really critical that we cut across siloed discussions and connect the food systems agenda to each of these crises. So one such opportunity to connect food systems and climate change across government policies and programs is through nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, as has been mentioned by the previous speakers. Using our 7 calls to actions as a foundational framework, we created a tool to help policymakers and advocates identify opportunities for integrating a food systems approach in national climate action plans. It also highlights the multiple benefits to biodiversity, health, economy, and society, and the diversity of context-specific solutions for food production, distribution, consumption, and waste. We're now in the process of applying it to the NDCs of 14 countries, of which 8 have been completed. So you can see that the green stars are those that we have a draft done, and we're checking and getting feedback from experts and advocates in country. And then the yellow are being developed currently over the next couple of months. But I can share with you, based on the assessments that we have completed so far, some emerging insights that we're seeing with regards to food loss and waste. First, the NDCs that we've seen, as has been mentioned already, is mostly focused on supply side aspects of food systems, with other areas such as on food loss and waste frequently overlooked. So for example, Bangladesh does not include food loss and waste in its interim NDC and does not have a food waste strategy in place, despite 10 million tons of food being wasted annually. Interviews conducted indicate that stakeholders in Bangladesh recognize measures to improve food storage capacity at the local level as a major issue and can contribute to food security and improve livelihoods, with the co-benefit of significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And just to make a point about connecting, that's not just about looking at, the emissions impact from food loss and waste, but also the issue of governance and good governance and participatory governance. So if they had actually had engaged farmers into thinking through the solutions, they would have identified that actually storage facilities is a key issue or a key barrier, and that it had potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But actually they haven't been included in the NDC development process. So that was really a missed opportunity in this round, but it could still be addressed in the next round. A second point is that many of the countries, and I'd say especially in low and medium income countries, lack the knowledge and robust data on food loss and waste. And it presents a significant challenge for considering food loss and waste and mitigation. And I've been reading the chat. I noticed that for many countries, people are saying, where do we get the data from? And I recognize that that is a really big problem. In Colombia, for example, food loss and waste was excluded from their modeling scenarios due to a lack of available data. And as a result, their NDC does not put forward any measures to address food loss and waste. So we can't address what we don't measure. So that's a really big issue, it's a first step. Next, we need to fill the existing data gaps in countries where information on food loss and waste is patching or missing. And this will help, not only, identify where can we make an impact, but also it helps identify, well, what are the co-benefits of reducing food loss and waste, as well as what are the potential trade-offs. In the US, for example, analysis has found that investments to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030 could have a 5-to-1 return on investment. Richard, you mentioned 7-to-1 and a kind of a global level analysis. In addition, it can create 51,000 jobs in the US, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and save water. And finally, none of the countries that we assessed so far have sufficiently addressed ineffective, inequitable, or harmful agricultural subsidies, which is actually one of the main drivers of food loss and waste. Where is money actually going to, especially public investment at this point? And if you start to look at that, actually, that is potentially a source of funding that can be redirected or repurposed to addressing some of these other critical areas, such as food loss and waste. And I'll just end with just a case study on an initiative called ReFed, a national nonprofit that's dedicated to ending food loss and waste across the US food system by advancing data-driven solutions. This is something that has been supported by philanthropy, by US foundations that have been concerned with the issue in the US. And the way ReFed works is they collaborate, connect with stakeholders across the food waste ecosystem, from food businesses to funders to researchers, NGO innovators, capital providers, and government policymakers to identify the challenges, trade-offs, and opportunities for collaboration. This multi-stakeholder approach has been really key for them in terms of how they work. And based on that collaboration, they developed the food loss and waste roadmap to 2030 that looked at the entire food supply chain, identified 7 key action areas over the next 10 years. And found that a 50% reduction target can reduce US emissions by 75 million tons annually. They also developed an insights engine, an online hub for data and insights, including detailed financial and impact analysis of more than 40 food waste reduction solutions. And this online hub was based off 50 public and private data sets. Their frameworks and methodologies have been adopted or used by over 20 organizations, including the OECD, APEC, Canada, and many multinational companies. And it just shows that setting a food loss and waste target, putting in place plans to collect data and develop policies and measures, if you set that intention, especially nationally from the government level, it can unlock private, philanthropic, multilateral investments that promote food system transformation generally and food waste prevention strategies specifically. So we'll be sharing more insights in the run-up to COP26, and we expect to launch the full results of all of our 14 country assessments in the first quarter of next year. For more information, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is there. So back to you. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much, Patty, and thank you very much for making that link to COP26 as a key element, and I think that's so important, but also data is key. And I think your point, what we don't measure, we can't manage. That's exactly right, and that's one of the key things we need to address as we try and divert investment into tackling this issue. So thank you for that, and it's now, can I just bring back all of the speakers and to go into the Q&A session. It gives us 15 minutes to talk about the questions, and great to see so many questions actually already come in. So thank you very much for that. I'm going, given the fact that we've got 15 minutes, I'm going to ask you all to be very pithy in your responses, if you can. So just want to make sure that we've got everybody there. So now there's a couple of related questions really, which is around tackling household food waste. And the role of retailers and manufacturers in helping citizens change. And I'm just wondering, I'll kick off with that with Ben, and just say, Ben, how do you think retailers and indeed food manufacturers can help bring consumers into the managed supply chain, was the word exactly used, and so, which I thought was a very interesting way of saying it. Starting with you, and then I'll open it up to others to speak.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard. To be honest, you know, the initial search for kind of a healthy financial balance is always looking, can we link the benefits to the investment? In the case of household food waste, that's of course very difficult. The benefits basically in the household budget. And consumers are possibly not really willing to pay for their own savings in food waste reduction, right? Yes, supermarkets can do a whole lot, of course. Basically, awareness, I think, of the value of food and the need to reduce food waste should be linked to anything, to your marketing campaigns as supermarkets, to your you know, of course, you can help people with apps if they identify themselves in shops, you know, kind of flagging certain things on their purchases, their food purchasing. So there are certainly things that supermarkets can do. What I overlooked mentioning in my presentation is, of course, you know, thanks to the research of UNEP and others, World Bank, we now know that household food waste is also an issue in developing countries and emerging economies. But the causes may still be different. For instance, a much lower level of refrigeration in developing countries, which is of course something that we can do something about. It's not easy, but it can be done, and it can also be done in an ecologically sustainable manner, of course, you know, solar fed. So those are things we really need to explore on the household level. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. And I think it's also, as in the Quartile commitment in the UK, retailers also help by changing their promotional practices, moving buy one, get one free, that type of thing, and indeed changing their packaging. So this added value, I think they can do with resealable packs that can also drive change. But I think that's...
Another way, of course, is several processing techniques that lengthen shelf life, but still keep the nutritional qualities of foods. Yeah. That's also extremely important.
Yeah, exactly. Great, thank you. And I'm going to move on actually to get as many questions in as possible to talk about SMEs. And Ian, this is coming to you. SMEs don't necessarily have the resource or the expertise to refine their business models. Do large firms like retailers and supermarkets that purchase from SMEs have a duty of care to manage across the supply chain, and how can this be incentivized? What are your thoughts?
Yes, it's the short answer, but because they've said it, right? So all those corporates have committed to food loss and waste targets. Do it. Don't talk about it, but do it across your entire value chain. You got the list of the 10 by 10 by 2030. So there's 10 big corporates that have said they want to do it. Let's bring all their value chains together. Let's bring those value chains together, provide the systems and solutions which they have, but which companies like LeanPath have to systematize this across the entire value chain. Let's measure this across the entire value chain. Then you have an asset that is systematically being measured, being acted, being invested, and we work all the way to prevention ultimately, because this is the deal. in Mexico, and you brought this to us, right? There's all these these smallholder farmers growing these tomatoes, waiting for these big retailers and their pricing practices to determine how much they should produce. And so in Mexico, you have this gross inequity of people who can't afford and have food, but yet are overproducing these tomatoes for retailers, right? So that doesn't make sense. So if we want to be really efficient about this, let's find practices that can get the right amounts, transparently priced to smallholder farmers, and that they can grow not only for retailers, but for their own communities too.
Totally agree. And would anybody else like to contribute to that answer at all? Any of the other speakers?
It's of course not totally true that all the SMEs, you know, sell their products eventually through supermarkets. There are tons of networks of SMEs doing business-to-business deals with each other, and finally to end consumers. So we should also look at ways to reach SMEs other than through wholesale supply chains. And for me, the big issue really there is measurement. You know, I can work with a large corporate and design a measurement framework for KPIs in our impact loans, in our 12.3 loan or other impact loans. But on the SME level, it needs to be much more standardized, while the business is not standardized. And that is something that I would really invite some views from others to see how we can do that. If we have the measurement, then we can structure the financial products around it. But we cannot, you know, we need a simple way of measuring.
Yes, and that's interesting, Ben, because that sets the scene for the next question almost, for us to really discuss the measurement issue in a bit more. And I'm going to perhaps address this to Adriana in the first instance, which is it only technical capacity that is preventing low and middle income countries from measuring food waste, or are there other barriers that we need to be overcome? I'll start with you, Adriana, and then open it up because it builds on exactly what Ben's just said. Oh, we can't hear you, Adriana, for some reason.
Today, I'm not lucky with the technology. Apologies
No,
for that.
Your luck is changing.
Yeah, no, it will be easy to say that it's a lack of technical capacity or knowledge. I think there are many factors. The first one I would say is the lack of information first on the impact. I mean, how big it is food waste? What is the impact? So, you know, what we don't measure, we don't know. So that's first. Second is, I think we need to communicate better what are the opportunities. I'm very happy that today some of you have highlighted the opportunities. What are the opportunities of reducing food waste? I mean, we did a great project in Colombia when you see that there are opportunities of creating, I don't know, food for cattle, for pets, agriculture products. What are the byproducts that you can do by reducing that? Then also, as Ben just said, the colleague from PGC, no, this is a system thing. I mean, it is connected to many different things. And what we really need to change is the system of the way we are producing our food and distributing that. So how is this linked also to poverty? You say Mexico, yeah, I'm from Mexico, and many other countries, we see this inequality, no? So how comes companies are afford or just think about wasting food where others have nothing? So I think what I just want to say is not only technical capacity, it's also to understand the dimension there. And two more things. Sometimes we don't have the right regulation. For example, you have many retailers or restaurants that want to make an effort in reducing that, but then there's not the right regulation or economic financial incentives. And the other one, and that's the importance of this webinar, is the funding. How can we then fund this initiative? So many different aspects to tackle.
Exactly, and I'm thinking that the funding initiatives is where Ben was talking about as well, if we have the standardized methodology. And I think that's, and interestingly, the RAP and WRI and CGF have come up with a standard methodology, which is now being used, for example, in Mexico, South Africa, and across Europe. And we're proposing to use it in Indonesia, which comes up with some really, really straightforward ways of doing measurement. So I think there's opportunities. We really have to drive that through. And that comes back to Ian's earlier point about target, measure, act, invest. So just getting to some additional questions, and I'm thinking, Marc, I wonder if you, the next one to address to you is, helping citizens reduce food waste through a behaviour change programme has worked really well. We've had some great examples in the Netherlands and the UK. I'm just wondering how we can incentivise governments to sort of prioritise this. As Ben says, it's difficult for businesses to pay for this and citizens directly. So I wonder how we might incentivise that.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that excellent question. I think that's a super important challenge, and like Ben mentioned, definitely I think having that partnership between public and private, I think is a very good opportunity for tackling exactly that. Currently in our current portfolio, we don't really have much attention on that right now, and that's one of the reasons, of course, why we want to really change that with this new sectoral guide, seeing there's a huge need and a huge demand and a huge opportunity to really tackle climate change through that angle. So I think having the opportunity from our side, for example, to come in and support governments better reporting that, better tackling that, raising awareness could be one angle, coupling that with private sector support to come in and then do the further investments later down in the supply chain to really help develop some different opportunities there. But I think we are really open to a lot of opportunities, and I think that there were so many good ideas mentioned today, and I think there are many others out there that we just need to identify and see how we can scale up. But I think there are many interesting cases also mentioned to the report by UNEP on the data that is out there. I think many times we really are not fully aware of what the situation is because we don't have proper data. But once that data is available and we can analyze it, I think we can really craft the right solutions going forward. Thank you.
And Marc, on that data and
we lost Richard.
I hope it's not because I said something.
So too.
Maybe I talk too much.
Does anyone else have access to the questions? Otherwise, we can take one or two more.
Hello, everyone. I'm Louisa at RAP. I wasn't planning to stand in here, but we're trying to work out what's happened to Richard and our colleagues who are joining us from our head office in Banbury. I think we've got time for one more question, and then we will be looking to wrap up. So I'm just going to run through the questions, and there's one here which I think was for everybody. So if we can all do a quick 1 minute response. I'm very much putting you on the spot with 1 minute, but 1 minute response to this question, and we'll start with Patty. Is it time for states to take on binding obligations, for example, an international treaty, to prevent and reduce food loss and waste, rather than voluntary commitments, initiatives and coalitions? So is it time for states to take on binding obligations, for example, an international treaty? And I can see Richard's back in the room, and I was just handing over a quick question to everybody to respond there, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Louisa. I really appreciate that, and apologies, I had a catastrophic crash of IT equipment, which is interesting. So thank you for stepping into the breach. I'm glad we have contingencies work. So can I quickly nip around the room? I'll start with Patty about that, if you don't mind, Patty. What do you think about binding versus voluntary? And then I'll just quickly nip around the room before we wrap up.
I mean, there's already, 12.3, right, where countries have committed to the SDGs. I think one of the, so, you can say whether it's binding or voluntary. The question is, what is the enforcement mechanism for that, right? If it's binding, who's going to follow up, right? Where does the financing come from? Where does technical assistance come from, right? So I think it's all a bit of, they're connected. So what's important is that there is a public government commitment, right? And there is some type of follow-up, there's some type of transparency and way of assessing progress. And so when that progress is assessed and is made public, that is a kind of enforcement. But so, you know, how we do that, that's something that we need to figure out together, I think.
Yeah, excellent response. Really interesting. And Ian, I just wondered if you wanted to say anything on that before I go over to Adriana.
Yeah, just building on that, I think it's up to us to do this. I think the business case is there. This is not about enforcement. This is about unlocking, you know, how we work together from the GCFs, working with the countries to actually see that there are nationally determined contributions with the analysis from Paddy's group that is actually doing this. So, and UNEP's report. So then how do we actually bring this action to life with SMEs, corporates, that really unlock these savings? I think that's the next stage. I don't think it's about treaties. I think it's about actual action to start documenting it, but actually just getting on with it, you know, quite simply, and starting companies to evolve, to actually demonstrate those savings. And for us to then, as a coalition, all these people on the call, systematically bring this together. The solutions are there. It's about actually implementation now to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Ian. And Adriana, if you would give us final comments before I wrap up for the morning.
Yeah, thanks. This is very good, interesting question. I think the problem and the dimension that we have in front is huge. We're now this decade of action, have 10 years to meet the target. So I would say we need both, voluntary, but also something that will really trigger more action. I don't know what, but for example, one idea that is already in the European Commission discussing is, can we ban any food waste going to landfills? Can we stimulate business to come up with creative, good solutions? How can we create more incentives in really meeting that? So, and not only living in the voluntary. So I would say we need both, and we need to speed up action because the dimension of the problem and the challenge is huge. And I have to say also, not putting the responsibility to private sector government, but it starts also from us as citizens. We have seen how food waste big parties in households. And you mentioned that the importance of behavior change, the importance of changing diets. So that's also essential. So it's a shared responsibility.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you all the panelists for an excellent discussion. That was really excellent. There's some key points that came out of that, and I just wanted to echo the point that we started off with this with target, measure, act, invest is our key way forward, I think, in terms of delivering change on food loss and waste reduction. It remains me to say to thank you all the speakers, to Patty, to Ian, to Marc, to Adriana, and to Ben. Thank you very much indeed for dealing with those technical changes that came through halfway through. I do apologize for disappearing briefly. And thanks everybody for coping with that. And to also say that there is a recording of this will be made available at the end of this session. And those questions that we've been unable to get to, there's been loads, we will make sure that we answer those, and those will go up on the website. So thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate this. Excellent workshop and webinar, and thank you for everybody for making it so interesting by such great questions. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to the next discussion on this topic.